Jaun Andreok, arratsaldeon dizuela guztioi, buenas tardes a todos y a todas, bienvenidos a esta nueva sesión, a esta nueva jornada o conversación del Festival Gutun Zuria, que afronta ya sus dos últimos días con la presencia de dos grandes escritores, al igual que el resto de invitados e invitadas que nos han visitado en estas casi 2 semanas de festival. Bihar Antonio Lobo Antunesen mintzaldia entzuteko aukera izango dugu areto honetan bertan, eta orain une batetik bestera John Banville izango dugu hemen Iñaki Esteban kazetariarekin. Horren aurretik ordea laguntzaile dugun BBKren partaidetza, así como la colaboración de las embajadas de Irlanda y Canadá, la Asociación de Libreros de Bizkaia, FNAC, Metro Bilbao, Alsa, Bodega Urbana, El Correo y Cadena Ser, horiek guztiak eskertu nahi genituen. Os recordamos, si no lo sabéis, que las conversaciones se pueden seguir todas en 3 lenguas, en euskera, castellano e inglés, a través del servicio de traducción simultánea, pero que para ello es necesario retirar los aparatos de traducción simultánea que se pueden obtener en el exterior de este auditorio. Gogora ekarri nahi dizuegu baita ere, iluntzeko 9:00 eta Bastida aretoan, Maialen Lujanbio bertsolariak eta Xabier Erkizia musikariak ikuskizun performance bitxia eskainiko dutela, txori mugariak ikusi nahi baduzue. Y un último apunte, y es que el festival propiamente se clausura el próximo día 23, martes, en la mediateca BBK con el concierto que ofrecerá el coro Euskeria, si os apetece ir a verlo. For Gutun Zuria Festival, it's a great pleasure having here in AlhóndigaBilbao such a great writer. John Banville is considered a pure writer, an author who is committed in obtaining a pure language, a poetry writer into prose. Este novelista irlandés es considerado, de hecho, uno de los grandes talentos de la lengua inglesa, hasta el mejor, según algunos, y siempre con el permiso de Joyce y Beckett, irlandeses como él. Literaturako Nobel Sariak aipatzen diren bakoitzean, kiniela guztietan bolo-bolo, ahoza ibiltzen da bere izena. Lo ha conseguido gracias a títulos como El mar, que en 2005 le valió el Man Booker Prize, y en 2006 el premio Irish Book. Conversará con él, periodista y asesor de este festival desde sus inicios, con Iñaki Esteban. Please, let's welcome Iñaki Esteban and John Banville.
Buenas tardes a todos. Muchísimas gracias por venir y por apoyarnos aquí en este festival de Gutun Zuria. Siempre decimos que es un festival de escritores, pero es un festival para los lectores, para la gente que le gusta la literatura. Hoy tenemos el enorme honor, ¿no?, de tener con nosotros a John Banville. Es simplemente recordar un poquito cuatro cosas sobre su biografía. Nació en Wexford, un pueblo de Irlanda, vive en Dublín desde hace muchísimos años. Empezó a publicar en los años 70, ha trabajado durante 3 décadas como periodista y bueno, tiene grandes éxitos a lo largo de su carrera. Uno de los quizá de los más significativos sea El mar, con el que ganó el Booker Prize, un premio importantísimo dentro de las letras inglesas o de habla inglesa, mejor dicho, y tiene otros libros como Los infinitos y el último, que se titula Antigua luz. Otra característica muy señalada, ¿no?, y muy bueno, que suele hablarse mucho de John Banville, es que tiene 2 personalidades, una que es la que firma como John Banville y la otra que es la que firma como Benjamin Black. Benjamin Black es John Banville. John Banville probablemente sea también un poco Benjamin Black. Con ese seudónimo suele firmar sus novelas policíacas. He leído esta semana que John Banville es ese gran escritor que siempre está en los escaparates de las librerías de culto y que Benjamin Black es ese escritor que arrasa en las librerías de aeropuerto. Por otra parte, les tengo que decir que John Banville es un grandísimo contador de historias, no solo a través de sus libros, sino que hace media hora que nos hemos conocido y que, bueno, es ya una parte de su vida muy bien contada, por cierto. Ya que quería empezar un poco al hilo de Mr. Banville, al hilo de su última novela, de Antigua luz, una de las partes, uno de los argumentos, trata sobre el enamoramiento, sobre la pasión de un chico, de un adolescente, por una mujer mayor, ¿no? Le quería preguntar un poco al hilo del tema de este año, de Gutun Zuria, si usted también experimentó una especie de primer amor, de pasión original, de pasión inicial por la lectura, más o menos en los mismos años, en la edad de la adolescencia, que es donde uno suele enamorarse de la lectura.
Yes, of course. I remember when I was even before I was a teenager, when I was very young, and I would read Wild West stories and detective stories and so on. I would weep when I came to the end of a book. I was always terribly sad. It seemed that it was a small version of death to finish a book. So I was a passionate reader. And in a way I still am. Unfortunately, nowadays I don't read as much fiction as I used to. I think nowadays I sometimes suspect I write more fiction than I read. It's a sort of disgraceful thing to do. But yes, I was always a passionate reader. Reading it's astonishing, you know. There are always new things to be discovered. I only began reading Henry James in the 1970s. This was a whole new world. I have no doubt that I could walk into a bookshop tomorrow, take a book off the shelf by somebody I've never read before, and discover a new world. I mean, this is an astonishing thing.
Uh-huh. Y es un mundo infinito también, el mundo de la lectura, ¿no? Lo cual quiero decir que es una pasión renovada, una pasión que se puede renovar siempre porque es un mundo que no se acaba, ¿no?
Yes, there's there was a country singer, American country singer, I can't remember what his name was. He said the country music was better than sex and almost as good as watermelon. And I think we could say the same of reading. Better than sex. It certainly lasts longer than sex and lasts longer than watermelon. It's a wonderful gift. I mean, it's extraordinary. It's you know, you pick up this thing, and you open it, and there is a world. You're opening a world. Mm-hmm. Astonishing. I still find myself amazed by it every time I open a book.
Mm-hmm. Hay escritores que incluso dicen que les gusta más leer que escribir. Quiero decir que si no fuera también por esa un poco la fuerza de la vocación y la fuerza del oficio y de la profesión, que ellos en realidad lo que más les gusta es leer y que incluso se imaginan, bueno, pues un futuro sin escribir, pero nunca sin leer.
Oh yes, of course. I mean, wouldn't you rather read than work? Of course. Reading is, as we say, that great pleasure. You curl up in a chair, and your mind is suddenly elsewhere. Your imagination is suddenly elsewhere. But writing too has its pleasures. It's mostly pain and horror, and writers always complain about writing. It is a difficult task. It's difficult work, but it has its moments. You know, now and then you would write a sentence, and it's like, you know, these won't do it, but when you nail against a wine glass, you get that chime, and you think, well, this is as near to perfect. This sentence is as near to perfect as I can get it, and as anyone could get it. That's a great pleasure. It doesn't happen very often, but it does happen, and it keeps one going. Just when one is about to give up and cut one's throat, one writes a sentence that's quite good. I had a funny experience. I never read my own work. I hate my own work. It's a standing embarrassment to me. But when I was finishing the Infinities, I think it was, for some reason I wanted to quote myself. I wanted to quote a couple of sentences from a previous book of mine, Ghosts. I have no idea why. But I took the book down from the shelf and simply copied it. And because I was copying it, I wasn't reading it as I would normally. And when I finished writing out these couple of sentences, I thought, oh, they're really quite good. They're really quite good. And just for once in my life, I got to see that yes, this is why people like my work. This is, it's not all. There's a wonderful cartoon by Gary Larson, great, you probably know that cartoon. It's a great genius, and it's a two-part cartoon, and it's a flower bed. And in the top half, there's a flower bed with these beautiful flowers, and it says how people see flowers. In the bottom half, they've all got crossed eyes and bad teeth, and it says how flowers see themselves. And this is how I am. People might think my books are beautiful. To me, they're all failures, and they're all, as I say, a standing embarrassment.
Siempre ha tenido esa fama, señor Banville, siempre ha tenido esa fama de perfeccionista, ¿no? ¿De dónde cree usted que le viene? ¿Es una cosa de conciencia? ¿Es una cosa de carácter? ¿De su propia educación?
Well, I can't see any point in doing anything if you don't aim for perfection. I mean, one would be very unhappy if one settled for second best. I would be very unhappy. I have to try to get it absolutely right. There's a wonderful little novel by Robert Coover called Spanking the Maid. And spanking the maid is simply that the maid comes into the master's bedroom every morning and he has to spank her. And he has to get. It's a very funny book. It's not erotic and it's not anti-woman. But it's about writing. It's about trying to get it right. And he casts it in this way of spanking the maid. Beautiful little book. And that's how writers are. Every morning we sit down and the maid comes in and we have to say, bend over, whack, whack, whack. Oh, God. Wrong again, wrong again, wrong again. It's always wrong. Randall Jarrell, the great American critic, defined the novel as an extended work of prose fiction which has something wrong with it. And I'm afraid he's absolutely right.
Pero, ¿por qué cree que esta perfección se da en los escritores, en algunos escritores, creo que no en todos? Y no sé, ¿usted piensa que se da también en todos los oficios? O sea, hay veces que tú llevas el coche al mecánico y te dice, bueno, pues con esto te va a tirar un par de años. Ya sabe él que no es perfecto, pero puede seguir adelante. ¿Hay alguna diferencia entre la escritura y otras, digamos, actividades o profesiones humanas?
Oh no, I think everyone aims for perfection. I think everyone aims to get it right. As I say, it would be a very frustrating life if one settled for second best. I presume this is the case. I have a Polish plumber who comes and he does work for me, and I can see him. He's just like me. He stands and he looks at the problem, and he shapes it in his head, and he thinks, how am I going to get this right? And it's exactly like watching myself work, because he's a perfectionist. And when he finishes, he says, it's not quite right. He said, he came the other day and he fixed my shower, and he said, I will charge you €150 for this. It really needs a bigger job done, which would cost €500, but I'll come and do that, and I'll take the €150 off the 500. I say to him, Jarek, calm down, it's fine. The shower works. He says, yes, but it's not working right. So yes, of course, everybody aims for perfection. This is the secret of happiness, I think. I mean, it's also the secret of unhappiness, of course. But to constantly to work to try to get something right is, to me, the only way to live.
Usted leyó Dublineses de James Joyce cuando tenía 12 años. Creo que fue la primera lectura que realmente le llegó en lo más profundo, podríamos decir. Sé que también que a partir de esa lectura empezó a intentar escribir cuentos con un poco en el estilo, ¿no?, de los dublineses. ¿Qué podría decirme de eso, Mr. Banville?
Well, it was an extraordinary experience because I had never read anything but, Wild West stories, detective stories, school stories, and suddenly here was a book that was about life as I knew it. The Dublin that Joyce was writing about at the turn of the 1900s was very like the world that I grew up in. It was only 50 years later. These are recognizable people. This is a great revelation to me that books could be about life as I knew it. And I immediately decided that I would try to do the same myself. So I wrote some truly terrible, terrible imitations of Joyce's Dubliners. I threw them all away, but I remember the opening of one. And it says, I was 12, 13, 14. The opening story was the white May blossom fell into the open mouth of the grave. I was a kid. I didn't know anything about life. I didn't know anything about death. But I knew that this is what writing was supposed to be. It was supposed to be serious and about life and death and so on. But I was young. I forgive myself now. I didn't forgive myself then, but I do now. I had to start somewhere, and that was where I started. And I kept at it. Then when I was 15 or so, I tried to be a painter. But I couldn't draw. I had no sense of draftsmanship. I had no feeling for color. These are all distinct disadvantages if you want to be a painter. But it did teach me to look at the world in a particular way, with a painter's eye. And that's good for a writer, I think. Certainly for my kind of writer it is. Because I like to try to represent the world. It can't be done, of course. I mean, a novel is nothing like life. It can feel extraordinarily like life, but it isn't anything like it. Because it's ordered and it's polished and it's finished, whereas life is incoherent. But I did learn to look at the world with that painterly eye, and that did help me. Mm-hmm. Somebody's phoning me.
Yeah.
Telling me to give shorter answers.
Entonces podríamos decir, Mr. Romy, que usted siempre desde que tenía esa edad, desde que era tan casi niño, ¿no? Se sintió inclinado hacia la creación. ¿No pensó en algún momento que podría tener una profesión quizá más estable, más productiva de alguna manera?
No, I wanted to be a writer. I mean, I wanted to... you have to realize that I was growing up in the 50s, 60s, in a small town in Ireland. Literature was an escape for me. It was a window on the world. It was a way of being elsewhere. I had to learn the hard lesson that literature is not an escape. Literature is a way of finding out about where you are. But in those days, it was an escape, of course. But I never wanted to be anything else. Looking back now, it seems to me very strange that I should have been so obsessed with being a writer. I mean, how did this come about? I didn't grow up in a household that was literary. I didn't grow up in a world that was literary. But, I began to read the Romantic poets when I was very young. I remember going into a new school when I was 13, 14, and the teacher asked me to stand up and read Keats's Ode to a Nightingale. And he could see that I didn't need to read it, that I knew it by heart. And he said, You've read this before? And I said, yes, I have. So I'd always loved words. I'd loved what words could do. I sometimes think that I love words more than I love what words represent, which is a very dangerous thing. To love books more than life is. Logan Pearson Smith said, "They tell me life's the thing, but I prefer books." And I sometimes think that's true of me as well. No, it's not. It's not. It's not. It's not. But it's an obsession that I like. It's a good obsession. I mean, one could be obsessed with gambling or drink or sex. Or for me, it's words. And words, as Yeats said, words alone are certain good. Right? This is true. You know, people talk to me about commitment and why don't I write about the political situation in Ireland? And I say, look, I have no interest in any of that. As a citizen, I'm interested in the world as it is, but as an artist, I'm only interested in art. But the fact is that even though the artist is amoral, not immoral, but amoral, you can't take a moral stance. The work of art is always a moral object, precisely because it is the best, the absolute best that this person could do. This flawed, sinful, perhaps even wicked person. You know, Louis-Ferdinand Céline was a great anti-Semite and not a very nice person. There have been lots of people like that. But his Voyage au bout de la nuit is a great masterpiece. So the art is always truthful. Because if it's not truthful, it's not art. It fails. So that it is a moral object in the world. It's not a moral act to make a work of art, but the work of art becomes a moral object in the world. This seems to me valuable in a very grimy time.
Como hemos dicho en la presentación, usted ha estado trabajando más de 3 décadas, 34 años, si no me equivoco, como periodista y los primeros años, sobre todo, en una parte del periodismo que ya se ha terminado y que es la de los correctores, ¿no? La de cuando se acaba el periódico, había un corrector antes, ahora ya no lo hay, que va revisando todo el periódico, cambiando cosas, cambiando palabras. ¿Cómo se sentía usted, señor Banville, con estos cambios de palabras? Es decir, corregía mucho, corregía poco, él le gustaba dar su pequeño toque, aunque sea a los textos, cambiar esta palabra aquí, esta palabra allá, o se limitaba a ver que todo estaba bien y ya está.
Well, it's slightly complicated. The first newspaper I worked on, and I worked on it for about 12 years, was a newspaper where everything was rewritten. The reporters would give you the copy, and they expected it to be turned on its head. The second newspaper I worked on, the Irish Times, you didn't touch the copy at all, which made life very boring. I liked tinkering with words. I liked that technical aspect of language. And I remember on the first paper I worked for, we had an industrial correspondent who always wrote in this extraordinarily hermetic language because he said he was protecting his sources. And one practically had to translate it. And he came to me one day and he said, "Did you do that piece of mine last night? Did you edit that?" And I said, I did. He said, "That was exactly what I meant to say." It was a great compliment, So I love doing that. I miss it still. I miss that. And I also miss office life. Office life is so strange. There's always a slight undercurrent of the erotic in offices. Always, always, always. I remember in the Irish Times when new technology came in, and people had email, and all kinds of erotic emails were being sent from desk to desk. That's what I miss. I miss that. And, you know, in an office, somebody will sit and tell you the most intimate details of their lives, and you meet them in the street, and you both avoid each other's eyes. There's almost a family atmosphere or an incestuous atmosphere. In an office, and I miss that as well. Yeah. And you know, there's always I don't know if you have this thing here of the Christmas party. The Christmas party is the most erotic event of the year for office workers in Ireland. You know, the most unlikely people pair off, and next day regret it, of course. But yeah, I miss that world of. A slightly chaotic world of office life.
Siempre se dice que los escritores viven en una especie de burbuja, ¿no? ¿Usted les recomendaría, no sé si tener un trabajo, ¿no? Porque seguramente les quitaría mucha energía, pero sí tener ese contacto con otras vidas, con lo que le cuentan, no sé, compañeros de trabajo, amigos en el bar, cosas de este tipo?
Well, I think it depends on the kind of writer that you are. I always wanted to be free. I wanted to have no sense that I owed my publisher a particular kind of book. I wanted to write exactly what I wanted to write. That meant that I would have to write, I would have to do a different job. This is why I invented Benjamin Black, to do my day job for me. Because that gives me absolute freedom. Now, life. W.H. Auden said that he was traveling through the Alps one day in a train with friends of his, and he was reading. And they said, "Listen, look at the view, look at the view." And he said, "Yes, I've seen the view." He went back to his writing. For writers, you just need one glimpse. One glimpse. Henry James said that a young lady of polite upbringing walks past a military barracks and looks in 3 windows. He said she can go home and write a 3-volume novel on the military life. And I believe this is true. You just need a glimpse. For the writer, one is constantly given too much information. You have to filter it out. Because the slightest gesture, you're sitting on a bus and somebody makes a gesture and you think, you see a whole world, you see a whole life in that one tiny gesture. It's probably not the actual life, but it's a fictional life. It's a life that one can make in fiction. So one has to have, you see the point I'm making, that you can't have too much experience. It would be overloading. I'm always fascinated by these great, these sort of Hemingway-esque people who go out and go to bullfights and drink and have lots of lovers and so on, and then commit suicide, which seems the inevitable end for a writer, if you sell yourself to celebrity and to the great world. You have to choose. You have to choose work or life. Yeats says you must choose perfection of the life or of the work. You can't have perfection in either. He's wrong about that. But you have to choose which you will concentrate on, whether you'll concentrate on life or work. And I always tell this little story that back in the 70s in Ireland we had amazingly a Spanish summer. It lasted for 3 months, perfect days. And I was writing a difficult book, and we were living on the side of a hill which looked over the sea, magnificent views, and my workroom looked straight out in this view, so I had to work with the curtains closed and a lamp on, because I couldn't deal with the view, otherwise I wouldn't have worked. And one day my wife and a friend of ours were having a picnic on the lawn with our little sons, and I could hear my sons playing and my wife and my friend drinking a glass of wine. And I parted the curtains and looked out, thought, this is wonderful, closed the curtains and went back to work. And it has always summed up for me the writing life. It's very sad, pathetic really, but that's how one works. If I had gone out and joined their picnic, what would prevent me next day from going out and joining the picnic, and the next day and the next day? You have to have absolute discipline. And it's probably too high a price to pay. I was speaking of Hemingway. Hemingway wrote what I think is one of his most marvelous stories. It just consists of 6 words. For sale, baby shoes, never worn. Heartbreaking story. And somebody was doing a book of 6-word stories, And my contribution to it was, should have lived more, written less. But I don't know that I believe it. You know, it's a nice thing to say, but would I have lived more if I had written less? Or would I just have driven people around me crazy by not writing? Because this is what I am. I've become a writing machine. I like to think that, I mean, it is, you know, writing fiction is an extraordinary business. You sit in a room for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, elaborating this fantasy, this strange, strange dream. And one does it for oneself. I never think of an audience. I never think of readers. I do it for myself. And then I publish it, and hundreds, maybe even thousands of people appreciate what I've done. And they, you know, the analogy I always make is that, you know, in your life you have 2 or 3 dreams that they seem to contain everything you are. You don't understand the dream, but it is vast significance. It colors your day, colors the world for days afterwards. And you get up in the morning after one of these powerful dreams, and you start to tell the person across the breakfast table about the dream. And the first thing the person across the breakfast table does is yawn, because there's nothing more boring than other people's dreams. And if you said, all right, I'm going to spend the next 2, 3, 4 years writing this dream, and then I'll give it to you to read, and when you read it, you will have the dream. That's what writing fiction is. You make people have the dream that you've had. It's a very strange phenomenon. People see things in my books that I don't see. You know, every reader is a kind of Freud. Every reader interprets what I've written and tells me things about it that I didn't know, which is a fascinating process as well. So it's, you know, when I say I don't live enough and I write too much, writing is living. Writing isn't. It's an intensification of life. Is this why people read fiction, why people read poetry, or people read philosophy? Because it intensifies the sense of being alive. You know, we're here for a very short time. We're placed in this extraordinary world that doesn't seem to have been made for us. And the only piece of direct speech that I've ever written in a novel is in a book called The Book of Evidence, where the character says, I have never got used to being on this earth. It seems to me that our presence here is a cosmic blunder. And then he wonders about, he says, you know, how are they doing? The people who are meant for here, how are they doing in a planet on the other side of the universe? And he says, no, they would have become extinct long ago, these gentle earthlings. For how could they have survived in a world that was meant for us? And I absolutely believe that. I believe this world is too tender and delicate for us. We are the most successful virus that there's ever been. We have colonized the earth. And the earth, someday, I think, will get rid of us, and we'll go back to a state of innocence and greenness. And I sort of dream about that time. I will regret it. I will regret the notion that my children's children's children mightn't survive. But I do like to think of the world. You see, I'm a complete misanthrope. I think we're well, I shouldn't say that. I think we're a virus, and I think we're a bad lot, but I also think that we are, in Emerson's wonderful phrase, he said, a man is a god in ruins, which I think is one of the most beautiful things he ever wrote. And I do like to think that we are ruined gods. And I do believe that. Look, you know, when you fall in love, remember falling in love for the first time? Suddenly this unearthly creature rises before you. You know in your heart that it's just a girl or a boy or whoever it is you fall in love with. But it's a deity. And you realize that for her, or for him, you're a deity as well. Two gods communing. It's an extraordinary phenomenon. Doesn't last very long, but while it lasts, my goodness, it is sweet. And I often think that, I mean, to me, for me, writing fiction, again, it has quite a large erotic element. Erotic in the widest sense of the word. What the artist does is the artist concentrates so hard on the object. It can be a person or a stone in the road, but you concentrate so fiercely on this object. The object says, I didn't expect to be noticed like this. I didn't expect this kind of passionate attention. And the object begins to blush. And this, I often think, is the whole purpose of art, is to make the world blush. Because when we blush, we're at our most vulnerable, and we give so much of ourselves when we're blushing. We're so self-aware that we burn, literally, we burn. You know, blood flows to our faces. That's what art does to the world. You know, I was in the museum today, the Guggenheim, and I didn't realize that they had Pierre Bonnard, one of his the nude in the bath. He did a whole series of them, which I think are great masterpieces of 20th century art. And I stood in front of this thing, and there he makes that whole, not just the nude in the bath, but the mosaics in the wall, the light on the floor. Everything is blushing. Everything is just exuding a sense of itself. That's what art does, and that's why we go to art. It quickens that sense of life, quickens that sense of who we are and what we are, thrown into this strange world. Sorry, I'll stop.
Volviendo a eso que usted decía sobre la bondad y la maldad del hombre, ¿no?, que conviven al mismo tiempo. Me contaba hace poco, hace escasamente una hora, que a usted le parecía que los restaurantes eran una gran invención del hombre y que mostraban ese aspecto más bondadoso, quizá, ¿no? ¿Me lo podría explicar un poquito, por favor?
Oh yes, we were talking earlier about, I think, you know, we have invented some amazing things, and the restaurant is one of them. You know, as we were saying, you walk into this place and a stranger comes to you and says, Mr. Banville, good evening, come, let me take your coat, let me take your hat. I'll give it back to you at the end of the night. Sit down here. Would you like a drink? What would you like to eat? I will be your friend for the next 2 or 3 hours, and return for a relatively small amount of money. This is an amazing invention. Amazing invention. We are capable of marvelous things. And of course, you know, if I were asked what is the greatest invention of humankind, I would say the sentence. Mm-hmm. There have been civilizations, I think it was the Aztecs or the Incas or something, they didn't have the wheel, but they had to have the sentence. Because the sentence is what makes us human. It's how we communicate with others, with ourselves. It's how we develop ideas. It's how we declare love, declare war. It is us. The sentence is the absolute necessity. It's the absolute unit that makes us human. And I feel nothing but privilege that I make some kind of living from working with this marvelous object that we invented. You know, because we speak and because we write and because we read all the time, we forget what an extraordinary miracle a sentence is. It's an amazing thing. We can encapsulate almost anything in a sentence. Somebody once asked James Joyce, to explain Ulysses to him in a sentence. And Joyce said, how long a sentence? I thought it was wonderful. Because, you know, a sentence can be 3 words or it can just tumble down a page. This is a marvelous thing. So, yes, we're capable of wonders.
¿Cuántas veces cuántas veces corrige una frase? No sé si alguna vez ha dejado la frase que primero le salió en el libro o si ya por costumbre la corrige una y otra vez.
Oh, I don't think I've ever left a sentence as I wrote it, no. I mean, I work by the sentence. This is my unit. I feel that if I get the sentences right, the rest of the thing, you know, the paragraphs and the chapters in the book will work itself. But I could spend a morning writing a sentence, and just not letting it go until it's as near to perfection as I can get it. This is a great frustration, but it's also a great pleasure. You know, how many people get to sit for a whole morning writing a sentence? It's a great privilege. I feel very lucky.
Dígame qué escritores cree usted que hacen frases más perfectas.
Oh, Samuel Beckett, I think. Beckett still seems to me the greatest sentence maker of all. The music and the tragic music that he makes in sentences is extraordinary. I love Nabokov, but Nabokov is very much image-based. He doesn't have the music that Beckett has, and he doesn't have that sonority that Beckett has. But then, you know, there are writers who, I mean, I recently discovered an English historian, Hugh Trevor Roper, who is one of the great prose writers of the 20th century. Superb prose writer. I mean, he makes exquisite sentences. So it doesn't just happen in fiction. It doesn't just happen in poetry. Good prose can happen anywhere. I've read, you know, instruction manuals for vacuum cleaners that have beautiful sentences in them.
Really?
Yeah.
Sí.
Yeah. I remember reading, I bought my first dishwasher, and the instruction manual was written by a great prose stylist. You know, it was perfectly clean. There was no, you know, it wasn't elaborate prose, but it was very clean, clear, exquisite prose. I should have written to find out who it was.
No, debe ser en inglés, porque en español no suele suceder eso. Suele suceder lo contrario, Mr. Banville. Y de hecho hay una norma que se va a poner en práctica dentro de poco tiempo para que las instrucciones de los electrodomésticos aparezcan más claras de lo que son. Pero bueno, eso es otra cosa. Le quería preguntar un poco por el más que por el lenguaje, por la lengua, ¿no? Usted es irlandés, supongo que su lengua materna es el inglés, ¿no? Pero aquí, por ejemplo, en el País Vasco siempre se ha dicho que escritores como Unamuno o como Pío Baroja se les notaba un poco esa especie de peculiaridad, un poco de que probablemente sus antepasados hablaran en lengua vasca o algo así. No sé si a usted le sucede algo parecido con el gaélico.
How long have we got?
No mucho más.
I'll try to be brief. The Irish language is a very oblique, a very poetic language. You can't say things directly in the Irish language. You know, you can't really say, I am a man, for instance. There's no real word for no. It's a very odd language. It's the direct opposite of German in that sentences begin with the verb. It's as far away from English as Basque is from Spanish. We lost the language, I suppose, 150 years ago, but it is still, what's the word? What's that term? Hardwired into us. The rhythms of it are hardwired into us. I think this is one of the reasons that Ireland produces so many writers, is that oblique, poetic, deep grammar is still inside us. But on top of that, we had basic English, which, because the British Empire was so strong then, English was like the Latin of the Roman Empire. It's a language of command, of direct speech, of clarity, and the tension between those two created for us a new language which we call Hiberno-English, which is not quite English, and it's certainly not Irish, but it's somewhere in between. And it's a wonderfully pliant literary tool. You know, an Irish writer glories in the ambiguity of words. You know, in Ancient Light, my character, he's called Cleave. And cleave in English means two completely opposite things. It means to cut and it means to join. I was delighted to find this. I was delighted by this ambiguity. An English writer will try to follow George Orwell's directive that prose should be a clear pane of glass that you look through at what is being said. For us, language is a lens. It distorts, it is very highly polished, and it's ambiguous. You never quite know what you're looking at, and we glory in that. So, for me, I feel again very privileged to be able to write in that language. It raises difficulties for us because, of course, in Ireland there are really no publishing houses. We all have to publish in London. And all London reviewers regard Irish novels as failed attempts to be English novels. And we have to try to say to them, look, this is not an English novel. You know, I'm not doing what an English writer would do. I am glorying in the ambiguity of language. You're not supposed to know what's going on. You're not supposed to have a clear story. You're supposed to be slightly confused all the time. This is, for us, the essence of art, the essence of the art of fiction, is slight confusion. And you can see it in someone like Henry James, coming from America. Henry James never writes clearly. And this is his great genius, that you never quite know where you are with this. And so it's very like the state of consciousness. You know, being conscious, being human, we're never clear. You know, one never knows what one is thinking. That only happens in straightforward books. But, you know, if you look at Proust, if you look at Henry James, if you look at practically any Irish writer, I think you get this fuzzy, foggy sense of being in the world and trying to make sense of it. That, to us, is what language should do. Does that answer your question?
Sí, no, le quería preguntar si esa música a la que se refería antes, esa música de la frase, esa musicalidad del texto, también tendría que ver un poco con esa característica irlandesa.
Oh yes, I think so. I mean, we have a difficulty as Irish writers that we are too much in love with language. We glory in it. We lie in it like pigs in mud, you know. Oh, wonderful. Language. Words. We love it. We absolutely love it. We're constantly telling ourselves our own story. Constantly. I always say that in Ireland you can commit almost any crime if you're a politician or a priest you can get away with almost anything if you give a good enough account of yourself. If you tell a good enough story, this is why I did it. People say, oh, okay, we'll forgive you for it. You know, we're a deeply deceitful race. My wife is American. She was brought up as a Midwestern Presbyterian. She's been in Ireland for 40 years. She still can't figure it out. I still have to say to her, they're not telling you the truth, darling. You know, they're giving you a version of what they would like you to think is the truth, but they're not giving you the truth. And then I said to her, but you know, of course, that the truth doesn't exist. And she goes, yes, it does. He says, I have to believe there is such thing as truth. And, you know, I remember sitting at a party in London beside Ronald Dworkin, who died recently, a great American political philosopher. And he turned to me and he said, there is such a thing as the truth, you know. And I said, this is a dinner party. Let's not open that conversation. But I saw his point, because he's read my stuff and he knows that I say that everything is ambiguous. And there is an argument to be made that one should how would I say, one should make an act of faith. We should say, all right, I'm going to believe that there is truth. Even though I know it's not the case, one should pretend that there is. One should, as Wallace Stevens says, one should believe in the concept of the supreme fiction. It's a wonderful notion. It's a fiction, but it's supreme. So you must believe in it. The Irish would never really accept that, I think. Everything for us is indeterminate and ambiguous. I suspect the Spaniards are somewhat the same. Comes from Catholicism, I imagine.
Yo creo que esto también se conecta con su otra personalidad, este juego de la ambigüedad y de una búsqueda de la verdad que, en fin, al final suele acabar ocurriendo. Pero bueno, me refiero a su doble o a su otra personalidad como escritor, a Benjamin Black, que bueno, siempre se parte un poco también en todos esos casos policíacos de la cierta ambigüedad sobre lo que ha pasado, es decir, sobre quién ha asesinado al muerto, ¿no? Al que está ahí. Es una especie de punto indeterminado de inicio que luego, y es una búsqueda al fin y al cabo de la verdad, ¿no?
Yes, when I started writing these crime books, which I did as a kind of adventure, I didn't know how seriously to take it. I still don't. I always determined that I would not write that sort of jigsaw puzzle story where, there's, like the game, what's the game? The Professor Plum hits somebody with a thing in the library. I wasn't going to do that. That I would be as realistic as I could be, and that I would make my so-called hero, Quirk, he's just as stupid as the rest of us. He if you want the opposite of Sherlock Holmes, then Quirk is it. He wouldn't recognize a clue if it came up and bit him on the leg. And I like him for that reason. All he has is this insatiable curiosity. He won't let things go, which I suppose is just suddenly struck me. I suppose he's very like a writer in that sense. It's curiosity about people and about the world. So I wanted to make books that would be, first of all, not cliched, and that would be, as near to realistic as possible. But you can't, the trouble with writing a crime novel is that a crime novel has to have a crime in it. So immediately you're limited. My ambition is to write a crime novel that hasn't got a crime. And in Elegy for April, I forget what it's called here, I came as close to it as I've ever come, because April, who is the victim in that, may not be dead at all. But you see my point that, I was inspired to do this by reading Georges Simenon, not his Maigret books, which I find boring and formulaic, but what he called his romans durs, his hard novels, which are magnificent. Some of the greatest literature of the 20th century, I think, are in those novels. But there, again, it's everything is ambiguous. Everything is, is this a bad person? Is this a wicked person? Is this a crime? Is this not a crime? That's what interests me in that kind of book. And, the writers whom I admire write like that.
¿Se siente más ligero, más sin tantas preocupaciones a la hora de escribir una novela como Benjamin Black en vez de como John Banville?
Oh yes, Benjamin Black is a craftsman. He has a task It's like, you know, making up a beautiful piece of furniture. It's to be used. These are not, they don't attempt to be works of art at all. They're something else, and I'm quite proud of them. I'm quite proud of the Pension Black books. I hate all my Banville books. I'm ashamed of them. They're a standing embarrassment to me. But the black books I admire and I like, because they're good work. They're honest work. I write them as honestly as I can. But I have no higher expectations of them. But people say to me, they say, oh, well, there's more of Banville in black than you realize. And I say, do you mean there's more of black in Banville than I realize?
¿Hay alguna, por decirlo de esta manera, qué es lo que ha aprendido John Banville de Benjamin Black y viceversa?
Nothing.
No.
They're two completely separate writers. I write, as Banville, I write with a fountain pen in books that a friend of mine makes me. He's a master bookbinder. He makes these beautiful books. I write with a fountain pen, very, very slowly, very, very slowly. Black works straight onto the screen, very fast. Banville might write 200 words a day. Black will write 2,000, 3,000 words in a day. Completely different way of working, completely different kind of book. Practically no crossover between them. Mm-hmm. And if there is a crossover, I have to get rid of it. Because if a Banville writes a sentence in a black book, it will stand out. You just have to take it out. Mm-hmm. And vice versa.
¿Cómo escribe? ¿Va alternando cuando acaba una novela de Banville, empieza una de Black o simplemente o no? ¿O es otro ritmo?
No, it's disciplined. I write a Benjamin Black book every year. It takes me 3 months or so. If I'm writing a Banville book, I put it aside and write the Black book. I can't write the two of them at the same time. I can't be both people at the same time. I tried in the early days to write as Banville in the morning and Black in the afternoon, but I couldn't do it. I had to separate them. So I have to finish a Black book and put it aside and then go back to being Banville. Mm-hmm. I'm not quite sure why that is, but that's the way it is.
Mm-hmm. Bueno, yo creo que es la hora de que podéis preguntar lo que creáis oportuno a John Banville.
Have you people been here all this time? It was completely black up here. There's a man up there. There's a man there in the middle, look.
¿Sí?
Señor Banville, quería preguntarle, habla usted de Freud. Freud tiene una frase que dice, después de 30 años de estudiar la psicología femenina, la pregunta que se hace, ¿qué quiere la mujer? Usted también se la hace, porque en sus novelas se nota que es usted un gran estudioso de la mujer. Gracias.
Well, it's funny. This latest book, Ancient Light, I think what it was. I looked at my manuscript book the other day, and I remember that I had written on the title page, ein Frauenbuch. Why in German? I don't know. A woman book, a book of women. And almost all the characters in that book are women. I find women extraordinary. I find them almost as extraordinary as I find the world. They seem to me so much better than I am, generally so much nicer. I know women can be wicked, but overall, everything I've learned in life, I've learned from women. And all the kindnesses that I've had in life have come from women. I am, I just adore women, in all shapes and sizes, in all ages. And I find them a constant mystery. This is completely unreconstructed. I'm a 19th century romantic of the worst kind, but I also think of the best kind. Women have taught me everything I know. It may not be much, but what I have of knowledge I got from women.
Hola, me gustaría saber qué opinión tiene sobre cómo imagina el futuro de la novela a raíz de las redes sociales y del lenguaje, digamos, más ágil y más corto que se utiliza en las redes sociales, y también cómo ve el futuro del lector, que parece que a veces se empieza a agotar ante un texto que le parece demasiado largo por esta influencia de las redes sociales. Gracias.
Yes, that's an interesting question. I don't think that social media are the danger. I think that the real threat to the novel is from television. Television now does so much. If you look at series like Mad Men or The Sopranos and these HBO series, which I'm sure you get here as well, they do what the great 19th century novel, the great social novel of the 19th century, is now done on television, I think. But you could look at it that will free the novel to become a much more poetic medium, a much deeper medium. Henry James always criticized what he called loose, baggy monsters, specifically George Eliot's Middlemarch. And it was Henry James, I think, who did most to turn the novel form into an art form. Modernism went in a different direction, and people didn't follow Henry James. I did, and a few other people did. But for the most part, we were dazzled by the avant-garde, and we went in that modernist direction. I think now now that the novel is freed from being popular, doesn't have to be popular anymore, we might find new things to do with the novel. I've spent my life trying to turn the novel into a poetic medium. Most people hate me for it, but that's what I've tried to do. And I think that I also think that there may be a new form coming. I see it in books like Claudio Margaris's Danubio, some of Roberto Calasso's books, which are not quite history, not quite philosophy, not quite fiction. They're a strange new hybrid form. I think that may come. I doubt that I will live to see it, but I think that might be another direction for the novel to go in. And we will always need stories. We are simple creatures at a certain level. We need to be told stories. We need to tell our own story to ourselves, as I said about the Irish. But we're constantly telling ourselves the narrative. Because there's no narrative to our lives, because we live in a completely chaotic way. You know, we imagine that we're masters of our own destiny, but we drift from this to that. You know, we drift everywhere the stream flows. And fiction is one of the ways that we impose a narrative on our lives, on the chaos. I mean, when I wrote about astronomers in the 70s, and I wrote novels based on the lives of Copernicus and of Kepler, I was fascinated by them because they were, you know, Copernicus and Kepler, they didn't really care how the world actually is organized. Their concern was to devise a system that would account for how the world is organized. It didn't matter if it was true, it just had to be plausible, and it had to be compelling. And that's what artists do as well. We devise an account of the world that is remarkably plausible. I mean, Emma Bovary or Leopold Bloom, they can seem to us more real than the people we live with. This is an extraordinary phenomenon. So there will always be the need for stories and the need for the shaped narrative. You know, we live in as I say, we live in chaos. We didn't experience our birth, we won't experience death. All we have is this incoherent mass in the middle. And this is why we go to art, to find something shaped and polished, with a beginning, a middle, and an end, that looks remarkably like life, but isn't like life at all. So it's a very powerful medium, and we need to have these polished dreams not to escape from life, but to have a quickened sense of being alive. So I think the novel will survive, but I don't think it will survive as it has been up to now. But, you know, everything changes.
Sí, aquí, por favor. Quería preguntarle si después de trabajar tanto una frase siente alguna desazón pensando en las traducciones.
Yes, I was in, well, I won't say where it was, I was in a country a couple of years ago, and in my book, The Infinities, I had written a sentence where the god is complaining about being forced to do things by humans, by mortals. And I wrote a sentence and said, "Fine gods we are that we must muster to a mortal must." All right? Almost impossible sentence. And when I'd written it, I thought, my God, how are translators going to deal with this? And I mentioned this to my translator in this foreign country, and she said, "I didn't notice that." And I thought, oh my God, she didn't notice it. What did she do with the rest of it? And, you know, I am conscious of presenting translators with an almost impossible task, because I work very much by rhythm, and you can transliterate from one language to another, but you cannot transfer the rhythm. The rhythm in English would be entirely different to the rhythm in Spanish. So I don't envy my translators their tasks. And I do keep in mind that there have been great mistakes. There's a working class novel, English novel in the 1950s called Room at the Top, which means, you know, there's always room at the top if you're ambitious. It was translated into Swedish as The Attic.
Fascinada con un escritor norteamericano que acaba de morir, que se llama David Maxon, y que escribía novelas policíacas y novelas, ¿no? Y terminó su vida escribiendo novelas que eran como twitters, ¿no? Y escribió antes de que el Twitter existiera, y sin embargo fue interesantísimo. No sé si usted lo conoce, David Maxon.
No, I didn't. I'll ask you later to write down his name. No, I haven't heard of him. To me, my sentences get longer and longer and longer. I think it's probably a reaction to tweeting and so on. You know, my sentences tumble down the page. They're getting more Proustian all the time. I really don't intend this, but to me, the intricacy of a thought requires an intricate sentence. That's just how I work. But I will get his name. I'd be interested to read a writer who writes in short sentences.
Sí, señor Banville, ha hablado de forma recurrente acerca de la perfección. Incluso ha comentado que puede estar hasta una mañana simplemente para completar una frase. ¿Qué es para usted la perfección? ¿Cómo sabe o cómo descubre por fin en el momento en que llega a ella, ¿no?
You can't reach perfection. It's never. It's always, as Beckett says, fail again, fail better. That's all we can do. The poet Paul Valéry said, "A work of art is never finished, only abandoned." And every sentence, in a way, is abandoned as well. You simply come to a point where you know that you can't do any more to it. And if you tinker with it anymore, it will fall apart, it will turn to mud. Because you have to try to keep some sense of spontaneity, some sense of sparkle. And if you work it too much, the sparkle dies. So you have to judge a point at which you say, this is as near as I can get to getting it right.
Nos queda tiempo para un par de preguntas más.
I've been enjoying your books for the last 30 years or so. I was just wondering how you view the development of your writing over that time. Is it a refinement or a correction, or are they completely freestanding works? Is there a thread? Is there a development?
I think I've learned simply by practice, by decades and decades and decades of practice. I've learned to use language better than I did. There is a danger in that. If you get to a point where your command of language is such that you can say anything, the danger is that's exactly what you do. You'll say anything. So you have to be aware of facility. W.B. Yeats's father, the best father any writer could have, he wrote marvelous letters to him to W.B. Yeats from New York. And in one of them he said a thing which I think I'll have carved in marble and put above my desk. He said, an artist must have a great facility and never use it. And that's a wonderful thing to keep in mind, that language is such a subtle and such a sly medium. It's constantly trying to trip us up. And when I was younger, it tripped me up by not allowing me to do the things I wanted to do. Now it's begun to trip me up by allowing me to do more than I should be doing. Does that make sense? So one has to be aware of that facility, that thing of merely saying because one can say. In a way, I often feel nostalgic for when I was starting out and was very clumsy, and words were, they were like pieces of wood in my hand. Now they're like pieces of silk. But silk is not necessarily the best medium to work in. So one has to be very wary. If there's been a progression in the content of the books, I can't say. I don't know. I couldn't comment on that.
Una pregunta más.
Buenas tardes. Usted ha hablado antes de la musicalidad y sus obras tienen mucho ritmo. ¿Ha escrito alguna vez poesía o...?
Oh, I did when I was young, of course. Love poems, all of which have been destroyed, I hope. I don't understand poetry. I read poetry all the time. I love it, but I don't understand the mechanism of it. My sense of rhythm is very fluid. And this is one of the difficulties of being a prose writer, is that you can't give directions to the reader as to how a sentence should be read. In a line of poetry, there's a rhythm, there's rhyme, there are all kinds of rhetorical devices that show you how to read a poem. But a sentence in prose can be read in any number of ways. So I spend a lot of time trying to get the rhythm of the sentence, to get it to such a level that the reader will be compelled to read the sentence the way that I wrote it. That's very difficult and very interesting. But poetry I wouldn't know how to do. But then, you know, my old friend, the Irish novelist John McGahern, late John McGahern, wonderful novelist, he used to make a nice distinction. He said that, and I presume you have this in Spanish as well, that there's verse and there's prose and then there's poetry. And poetry can happen in either medium. And since he was a novelist, he said, of course it happens in prose much more often than it does in verse. And I sometimes think that is true. Poetry is the essence. It's that clear drop that you get when you press on the language. You press it and press it and press it. We're in a building that knows all about the clear drop of that clear, sparkling, glistening drop. That's poetry. And that doesn't happen very often, but it can happen in either medium. So I don't need to write verse. I try to write poetry.
Bueno, pues muchas gracias por haber venido. Os recuerdo que podemos beber un vino ahí fuera y que John Banville estará para firmar libros. Un aplauso para John Banville, por favor.